That's totally fine. You'll find the link in the announcement. Okay, bye-bye. You'll find the link in the announcement. All right, bye-bye. No, it's in the announcements on our page. It's in the announcement that came out yesterday. There's a Zoom link. Just click on that link. It will only be like 30 minutes, 35 minutes. Okay. If you want to do that, or you can watch the recording of it. Yes. Yeah. Or you can watch the recording. Okay, bye-bye. Okay, good morning. How are you?
Good.
Sorry about that delay. We'll get started in just a few seconds. I have the screen on in the back. It'll come up in just a second. If you have any questions, I'll give you a chance to ask at the end of class, okay?
Okay.
All right, perfect. How's everybody doing? Good morning. Perfect. Okay, cool. So let me make sure you guys can see that. Okay. So what we're looking at right here is the announcement that I sent out yesterday. That announcement is for week 7. This week is a kind of easy week. You only have 2 things that you have to get done by the end of the week. Although both of those things are not due on Sunday. So one is due in the middle of the week. So you really want to make sure that you're focused on that first because it's due by Thursday night at midnight. So we're going to talk a little bit about this. But the one thing I wanted to let you know is that everything that you have turned in has been graded. So you should be able to go to either the People tab and click on your name or the Grades tab and find out what your grade is in the class right now. Obviously, we build points over the course of the semester. So if the grade is not where you want it to be, don't worry about that because generally the first speech is the poorest grade and they start getting better as long as you follow the feedback you're getting. So as long as you're making adjustments based on comments that I gave you in reference to your speech, you're changing things up based on what your peers have reviewed and given feedback on, then you're going to see your grade go up over the course of the semester. Now, what I will say is that there are major differences between the speech we just gave and the speech that we're about to give next week. The major difference is that it's 2 minutes more in length. So you're going from a 3-minute to a 5-minute. You do not have to cite sources. You do not have to have visual aids, but you will have to provide me with a copy of your speaker notes. So if you wanted to use what you're turning in on Thursday, which is your blueprint as your speaker notes, you could just upload that assignment again once you upload your speech. There'll be a little tab that says speaker notes. You can take that same file and upload it again, as long as that's what you're using as your speaker notes. If you're using Post-it notes or you're using note cards or you've written out your speech, then you need to make sure that you upload that to the class. Or if you take a photo of whatever you put on your screen, well, however you want to do it, it's totally fine. The other difference that you really want to be aware of is that this is going up 50 points. So we're leaving a 50-point speech and we're going to a 100-point speech with this next speech. That means 1 full letter grade. So if you don't take into consideration some of the feedback that you got, that may play into the speech not getting you the grade that you want. And I prefer that you take advantage of the comments that you've been given, make adjustments where you feel like you need to, and try to get that speech up to the level that you want it to, since it's a full letter grade, 100 points. Now, that speech is not due for another week and a half. So in the middle of next week, you'll start thinking about uploading it. But by the end of this week, you should have it written. So that means that by Sunday, we should be at the point where you're starting to practice it, getting ready to record it, and posting it by the end of next week. We will have class next week where we'll talk a little bit about posting it and some communication apprehension, like how to deal with the nerves. We'll also review for your midterm, which will be the following week. So this week's going to be kind of easy, but what that means is that you should take advantage of that easiness Do these assignments, get that speech written, and start to practice your next speech that you have due. Now, if I look at the speech advice week 7 update, it says that the 2 assignments that you have due this week, one is due on Thursday night, and that is your speaker blueprint for speech 3. Now, let's say that you haven't decided what you want to talk about yet. You thought you might want to talk about food. You've thought about talking about a favorite place, but you still haven't determined which one. If you're still at that position on Thursday, pick one of them. It doesn't mean that you have to be married to that topic. You can change it after you turn your blueprint in. But I'm using this just to make sure that you know the needed components for the intro, the body, and the conclusion. As long as you show me that you would know what needs to go into that speech, you could change your topic the next week and then turn in a different blueprint that matches the topic that you really decided to go with, all right? That's due by Thursday night. The second thing that's due is there are 2 speeches that are listed under week 7 that you need to watch by the end of this week. They're only 3 minutes in length. You'll find them right here under the week 7 famous speech critique. If you click on that, you'll see that it shows you the 2 speeches that you must watch. It also says that you need to give me at least 3 paragraphs of a critique of these 2 speeches. Now, they're controversial topics, both of the speeches, but you're not looking at the content in reference to your opinions. So you don't have to agree or disagree with what they're saying, but you can talk about what their arguments are, the way you feel like their speech could have been stronger, what they could have said to sound better if it's something that you may not agree with, what they could have left out if it's something you felt was uncomfortable. Whatever you want to compare and contrast is totally fine. I find that some students like to comment on the first speech, talking about what they liked and disliked, comment on the second speech in another paragraph, what they liked and disliked, and then in the third paragraph, they compare and contrast and talk about why they chose one speech over the other as being the better speech. However you want to do it is totally up to you. You know, some people will compare and contrast the delivery of both speeches, then compare and contrast the content, and then they'll look at what they thought was working or not working and which speech was better. I don't care what you do in reference to the 3 paragraphs. You can't just give me a couple of sentences and call it good. All I'm saying is I want you to analyze them and kind of see what you would do differently based on this content. And really what I'm wanting you to focus on is the delivery. Because by this point, you should know how to write a speech. I've talked about the blueprint until we're blue in the face. Now it should be delivery. How do I deliver a good speech and make sure that I'm connected with my audience? Any questions about any of that? When's that due? No, Sunday, exactly. The blueprint is due on Thursday. The famous speech critique is due on Sunday. Everybody with me?
Mhm.
Blueprint is Thursday. Famous speech critique is Sunday. Awesome. Okay, perfect. So now let's look at module week 7. And you'll see that that is where you turn in your blueprint right there. And you'll see that the readings are there. They're the same readings that we had last week. And I also show you another PowerPoint that I gave you last week, but today we're going to discuss it. Last week we discussed one PowerPoint. This week we're going to discuss the other one. So if I click on this, and in last class, what I told the students is, you don't have to copy this down because you have this on Canvas, but you are going to have a midterm on this in the next couple of weeks. So you might want to take some notes while I'm talking. And like, if there's something that doesn't make sense or you need to explain it more to yourself, you just jot that down. So when you look at the PowerPoint, it still makes sense. The other reason that you might want to have a piece of paper out is because I might say something that gives you an idea for your speech. So when we start to talk about the intro, the body, and the conclusion, I've broken it down into those different areas. And those areas might be something that you need support on. And that might be a good thing to kind of write down so you have it for future reference. But you don't have to take notes because the notes are already up there online. So let's talk about The first thing, which is the introduction. Now, in the introduction and the conclusion, you have to have an attention getter. There were multiple speeches across my classes where students would start out with either their purpose statement, or they'd start out with talking about something that was not relatable to their speech, or they may start out with just telling a story, but it didn't really relate. It was like the main points. They were just kind of already starting into their speech. A lot of times I find that that happens because students don't really know different types of attention getters. Most students will go to the tried and true. They'll just get a quote. So for example, in some of my speeches, there were speeches about education. So they quoted Albert Einstein, or they were talking about nursing and they gave a quote about the nursing profession and what they think about nursing. There's all kinds of different quotes that are out there that could lead the speech off in a way that relates to what you're talking about. The major thing that you want to make sure is that it does relate. Whatever you start with, it relates to what you're going to be discussing. So for example, if I was going to tell a detailed story, that detailed story would not be what I did this weekend. Oh man, I just got back from Big Sur, I had a great time. Okay, now I'm going to tell you my speech. The detailed story needs to be something that's connected to what you're discussing. And so it could be a hypothetical story, like I want you to imagine, and then I kind of take you on a journey by telling you the story. Now I'm going to tell you what my purpose is. Now I'm going to tell you how I'm going to talk about that purpose. That would be the purpose in the thesis. Another thing might be a real live story that you've read somewhere. So for example, it might be an article that is talking about something that's connected to your subject. So for example, there was a speech about domestic violence that happened in this class, and quoting the recent events that happened around Gabby's death, and everybody's been talking about that domestic violence issue that was happening in that relationship and what that meant for the couple and why there were signs that were ignored. Well, that detailed story that's being quoted in the press could be something that you start with and then say, today I'm going to talk to you about domestic violence. I'm going to talk about the signs. I'm going to talk about ways to deal with it. And I'm going to talk about my personal story. That would be a purpose statement and a thesis statement, but it's built around the detailed story in the beginning. Make sense? Now, if I'm reading a detailed story from somewhere else, what must I do? Cite it, exactly. If I'm just telling my own personal experience, obviously I don't have to cite that information. But if I've read it somewhere else, I want to make sure that I am citing it. A sequence of brief instances. So for example, that might be where I'm talking about, like I had a girl give a speech about 9/11, and she talked about the moments before the buildings went down. And she said, everybody talks about the impact and the tragedy of 9/11, but no one really talks about the moments or days before the event. And today I'd like to walk you through some of those events. And she started with at 9 this time, at 8 o'clock this time. And that kind of grabbed our attention right at the beginning. And then she went into the purpose of her speech. I had another guy give a speech about surfing. It was a hobby speech. And he started off by talking about it's 4 a.m. and that insistent sound that your alarm makes that we all can't stand starts to go off in my room. But today I wake up with excitement, not dread, because I know my day is going to be filled with my favorite hobby. I grab my backpack, I put my board to the top of my vehicle, I roll down the windows, and when I hit the coastal mountains, I can smell the salt and the cool, crisp air, and soon I know my feet will be planted in sand. Today, I'd like to tell you about my favorite hobby of surfing. That's brief instances. We're with him thinking through those steps, and then he gets to his purpose. So those brief instances could be like a play-by-play of how we're getting into that subject. Another example might be humor. Again, we don't want to tell our audience we're trying to be funny. We also want to make sure the joke relates and it's appropriate. So we don't want to be insulting our audience. We also want to be careful the types of things that we talk about. But again, it must relate. So for example, I've heard this corny start that some people do where they come up and they say, sex. Now that I've gotten your attention, I'd like to talk to you about global warming. And now that attention getter is not about what they're talking, unless they're going to talk about the friction of bodies and how that leads to the warming of the earth. Now we're totally in a different mindset to where they're going with their speech. And it's corny and not relevant. So you really want to make sure if you're telling a joke, it's got to relate to kind of what you're talking about. Now, another example is clothing. So for example, in some of the speeches I watched in the classes, people wore scrubs. One person wore an outfit that was connected to their job at Starbucks. Another person wore something connected to McDonald's. There are lots of different things that people could wear that would be attention grabbing based on the clothing. So sometimes the clothing can relate in a significant way, and that ties the speech in. Sight or sound. So for example, especially in this environment, because we're in a virtual world, you are able to use Zoom, put us on a PowerPoint, show us some photographs, play a tune or a clip of music, and then tell us about whatever your subject is. So use the computer to your advantage, give that visual grabbing of the attention from something that is created by someone else. So there was a great speech about the Azores, and a guy gave different images of that beautiful country, and that's how he started his speech. So it was easier to listen to because your attention's been grabbed. You're interested in what he's going to be talking about. So sights and sounds, video, audio, images, all that stuff. Quoting or paraphrasing, I've already talked about that one. But again, if you're going to quote something, you need to make sure you tell us where you got the quote from, and make sure that it relates to what you're talking about. A mistake that some beginning public speakers will make is they'll say the quote in the very beginning, and then at the very end, they'll just repeat the quote again. Don't do that. You want to refer back to it in some way, but don't just repeat it. So for example, if I'm using a quote by Walt Disney, I might refer back to that quote in some way, or use another quote about Disneyland instead of the one that I've already used. So tie it in, but don't repeat it. You don't want to be repetitive. Startling fact. So this might be something that you just know. So for example, I had a guy years ago, his family was from Tulare and they owned a dairy. And he talked about the fact that his family's dairy produced so many gallons of milk, it could fill Kaweah Lake, and I can't remember the number, but it was a lot. And it was startling. And that let me know, wow, I know how big Kaweah Lake is. That's a lot of freaking milk. And so I listened more about the family dairy because of that startling fact. And so he knew that that's not something he could really cite as a source. But let's say that I'm talking about Mothers Against Drunk Driving, and I'm trying to convince people not to drink and drive. And the startling fact is about how many people die in a drinking driving accident every hour, or whatever the number is. So I would need to quote where I got that from, and I would use it as something to grab your attention. And a way that I could tie it in at the very end of the speech might be saying something like, over the last 5 minutes, I've been talking about something that could affect all of us. In fact, over these last 5 minutes, X number of people have actually died from a drinking and driving activity. Let's not get in the car and be the next one, or something like that. So you're tying it in some way. We guess the intro. So for example, there was a couple of speeches that were creative writing, and I didn't really know where they were going with their points, but they revealed it as they got into the subject of their speech. That's very interesting. It's a great way to really, force us to listen if you feel like you're a good creative writer. If not, don't force yourself to do it. But if you do like writing creatively, it's a really cool way to start your speech. You give us hints, but you don't reveal it until you get to the area or the point of your speech that you want to. Role play. So that's where you get us involved. You might ask us to do something. You might have us talk with another person in the class. You also may have something planned in advance. So for example, years ago, I had a guy, it was around this time of year, Halloween had just passed, And at the very beginning of class, he asked if he could pass out candy to people in the audience. And he said, hey, I have this Halloween candy. Can I pass it out? And I was like, yeah, totally fine. Well, then he was like the 6th or 7th speaker that day. And when I called his name, he went to walk. We were in this classroom right here, and it's like theater seating. And he went to walk down, coming towards the podium. And as he began to walk towards the podium, someone sitting in the seats started to choke, or what I thought was choking. And they were like, like that on a piece of candy. And I was like, hey, man, you all right? And the student that was, I called his name and was coming to the podium was like, it's okay, Miss McGee, I got this. And so he grabs the student, he picks him up, and he does like this thing where he presses on his stomach, and the kid shoots the candy out, and it went across the room and hit the whiteboard and fell down. And I was freaked out, let's just say. And then the student turns around and says, you never know when a life-threatening moment could be in front of you. Today, I'm going to tell you 3 signs to look for and how to deal with them. Now, I was ready to kill that kid, well, I'll be honest, but it definitely grabbed our attention. Had he thought about it and planned it out in advance? Yes. He pulled us all in by giving the candy and kind of talking through it at the beginning of the class. Nobody knew that they were the subject of his attention getter, but it was that well planned out. He worked it out with the guy. They talked about what they were going to do, and everybody paid attention to that speech because it was so role played and so involved for the audience. It's a really cool way to start the speech. Slides and photos, kind of like what I just talked about. You might have some images that you want to just show right in the beginning. You show that image and it jumps right into what you're talking about. So just like that visual element where you might show a video or play a song. Rhetorical questions. Lots of students start with this as the semester goes on. They struggle to come up with an attention getter. And so they go to something that's really simple and easy. Imagine if every single person, though, used a rhetorical question. So if every single person came with, how many people ever played soccer? How many people ever been to Disneyland? How many people like going to the beach? If every single speech started with that rhetorical question, I promise you it would get redundant and lose its effectiveness. So a rhetorical question is asking a question you don't expect the answer to, but sometimes you may have people in the audience that will, and you got to be ready if they start to interject or get engaged. So they may say, yeah, man, I love going to the beach. I go to Splash Cafe, and you're ready to give your speech, and they're thinking you really wanted an answer. So be careful when you ask those questions for what you might get back in response. That's what's called a rhetorical question. Another thing that you can do is refer to the event. So let's say you're speaking at a gala or an award ceremony, you might refer to that event in some way, and that's your attention getter. I've had a lot of students that will start their speech off talking about how nervous they are. And they'll say, I know a lot of you probably are feeling the same way. Today, I'd like to talk about something that calms my nerves. That's great. But again, if every single person referred to the event, it would be redundant and wouldn't work as well. So just be thinking about what's something unique to my speech that I know won't be used by other people, and that's going to make it stronger. Recounting a fable or a poem. So that might be reading a passage from a book. I had a student, her mom had taken the Oh, the Places You Will Go book by Dr. Seuss, and she took it to every teacher from kindergarten to 12th grade after the girl's year was over at school and had the teacher sign it. And at the end, when she graduated, the mom gave that to the daughter as a gift, and every teacher from kindergarten to 12th grade had actually signed a message to her, and it was a cool collectible that she had. But she used that book as her artifact item. And the way that she started the speech was by reading a passage from the book. So that was a great example of how you could use a poem or a fable or a story to start. Brief demonstration. So for example, let's say that you want to show us how to change the oil in our car. You want to take us right to your engine and start showing us that demonstration right in the beginning. Maybe you're going to show us how to make your famous guacamole or salsa. You pull out the ingredients and start making it right in the beginning. Great demonstration element where you catch us right in the beginning with some live action. Obviously, some pre-plan has to happen, and you've got to get us engaged. But it is always a great way to get us our attention is through some activity. And then the last one that is up there is, if a speech is persuasive, one thing that you can do is start with a challenge. Now, the next speech in this class, not the one that's happening next, but the one after, you have to pick whether you're going to do an informative or a persuasive speech. And a persuasive speech is asking the audience to think or act or do or believe a certain way. And in an introduction of a persuasive speech, one way to start is to issue a challenge. So you might say something like, by the end of this speech, I hope all of you will make the commitment to no longer text and drive. Today, I'd like to tell you about that new problem with the use of technology. I'd like to tell you what the statistics say about texting and driving, ways to prevent yourself from texting and driving, and why you should definitely make this commitment. That would be a great attention getter. And then at the end, you go back to that challenge where you go back to the commitment you asked us to make, and then ask us to visually make the commitment by raising our hand or pulling out our phone and downloading an app that's going to help us not, be on our phone. Whatever it is, you go back to that challenge at the end. Any questions about attention getters? No? Okay, perfect. So every speech should have an attention getter. I should not watch one speech where I have to say, don't start with your purpose. A lot of speeches I had to do that. So make sure you have that attention getter. You want to make sure that you're motivating your audience to listen right in the beginning. That is the goal of the intro. Engage us, make connection with us. Don't read. Don't be looking down at your keys or over to the right at your notes. Make eye contact with the camera. Talk to your audience. Really make that connection early on. You want to make sure that you practice eye contact, because if you don't, for the next speech, which is live, you're going to struggle to look at those boxes, because everybody is going to have their camera on. You're going to be looking at the camera, and you're going to be focused on those people and not the camera if you haven't trained yourself to focus just on the camera. So don't look at the boxes, focus on the camera. This is the time to get started and practice doing that. You also want to make sure that your intro has a clear purpose and a thesis. Many times people had an attention getter and a purpose, but they did not tell us how they were going to talk about their item. So make sure that you have clear main points. In the very first speech, some of you talked about, who I am, who I was, who I am, and who I will be. You're not going to be able to use that for your next speech. So you've got to start thinking about, how do I introduce my topic, and what types of points could I use that relate to whatever my purpose is? And I'll give you some suggestions on what to do about that today. Make sure that if there's terms that you're using that we don't know the answers to, that you are defining those things. Make sure you are working to define workable terms that we may not have working definitions for. So what is global warming? If you're talking about Disney, are you talking about Disneyland or Disney World or the Disney Corporation? Make sure that you are defining those things when you're communicating with us. And then in the conclusion, you want to make sure that it has a summary or a final focus. You're trying to make sure that you're bringing us back in. That's where we're going to be listening again and reminded of what you talked about. You want to make sure that you are bringing it full circle. And how do you do that? Exactly. So I have to figure out some way to show the audience that my speech is concluding without just saying, okay, that's it. That's all I got. I want to make sure that I go back to that attention getter in some way. So the natural progression is to think, okay, well, they've reached the end of the speech. So really think about coming back, getting back to that attention getter and referring to it in some way. If you issued a challenge, go back to that challenge. Tell us what you want us to think about in reference to, or do in reference to what you've talked about. If it's make a certain meal or visit a certain place or do a certain thing or believe a certain way, what are you actually asking of us? If you're talking about something that is, let's say you're trying to convince us to save 10% of our weekly income or tithe that amount to our church or charity. And then at the end, you might say, visualize a future where you have this amount of money to spend on Christmas shopping or take a vacation or make the world a better place because these funds are going to provide a better life for other people. Whatever it is, you're going to make us imagine that by visualizing it with us, and that could be a good way to end the speech. Reconnect. In the conclusion, a lot of people ended with their last body point, and then they were looking for the end button while they're still speaking. We should not see the signs that you are ending your speech until we hear your attention getter, and we should not see any body language that we're looking for how to hit the stop record button until we actually stop speaking. So we have to be making eye contact, finish that presentation, and then once we're finished, then go hit that stop button. But don't end it abruptly at the end, still while you're speaking at the end of the speech. Now let's talk about the body. Any questions about the intro or the conclusion? Clear about what you need to have in those blueprints on Thursday. Any questions? Okay. So as I said, some of you use that who I was, who I am, who I will be, which is totally great. I'm assuming you must have seen that on the sample that I gave you at the beginning, but you don't have to use those main points as your body points. Obviously, if you're not talking about you, you're not going to have those be relatable. So some things that you might consider for your body might be chronological points. So for example, let's say I want to talk about my favorite car, and I'm going to tell you about its development in the 60s, the 90s, and today. Maybe I want to tell you about fashion in the 70s, 80s, and today. Whatever it is, if I'm looking at it chronologically, those sequence of dates will make up my points. That first point, second point, third point is going to be connected to dates. So whatever your topic is, you could put it in a chronological framework for the main points. Spatial or geographical. So spatial might be, if I want to talk about the Chevy Camaro, I might say I'm going to talk about its interior, exterior, and the engine. That would be spatial. Geographical might be if I'm going to tell you about the state of California, and I'm going to tell you about the places to visit in Northern, Central, and Southern California. So I've broken the state down geographically through those landmarks. Northern's going to be my first point, Central is going to be my second point, and my third point is going to be Southern California. And so that's how I create my main points. Topical might be just figuring out what my topic is and breaking it down based on that topic. So for example, I want to talk about the Beatles. I might talk about the band members, some of their famous hits, and who they have inspired in music. And so those might be my three major points. And all I did was look at the topic and figure out what was most relatable or seemed most familiar to the topic that I was discussing. So it's really just looking at a topic and building your points off of that topic, which is what most people do. If you want to think about something that could be persuasive, you might consider a cause and effect speech. So because of this, this is happening. So for example, there's a lot of people that will argue with global warming that the reason that we have large weather events and extreme weather events is because what's going on with our climate. Other people will say that it's not that at all. Our Earth has lots of different swings over the course of its existence, and it's just something normal. So this cause is not this effect. So that would be a persuasive appeal as well. So causal patterns would be looking at cause and effect. Those would be those 2 points that you were trying to make. Another example might be a problem solution speech, and that's where you introduce an issue and then you give us some solutions to deal with whatever that issue is. So for example, I might talk to you about climate issues and then tell you ways that you could recycle and give back as just an average person. You might not be able to go get the trash out of the ocean, but what could you do to be an active member in creating a better climate? That might be my problem solution speech. And then another example could be compare and contrast. So let's say I want to compare the Chevy Camaro to the Chevy Corvette. And I want to give a compare and contrast of what is different between these two vehicles and why I think one's better than the other. Or I don't tell you at all, I just let you decide based on those comparisons and the contrast of them. And then finally, whatever patterns you choose to use, you could have a mixture of those. So for example, if I did talk about the Chevy Camaro, I might say, I'm going to talk about my favorite year of that vintage. I'm going to talk about the features that are interesting to me. And then I'm also going to contrast it with other sports cars. So I'm taking lots of different formulas or patterns of body arrangement, and I'm just picking and choosing what works best with the topic that I want to talk about. But these should give you some guidance as you go to write your blueprint for the first time this week. All right? Any questions? Yes, ma'am. Well, the next speech that you have in here, you have to choose either informative or persuasive. This speech, you choose the speech, you can choose to do whatever you want. Either inform us on something, persuade us on something, or a little of both. Totally fine. There's no requirement of the purpose of it. Okay? Any other questions? No? All right, I'll see you next week. Any questions online?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I know you probably remember my speech. Maybe you could break it down. I did the one on the Portuguese culture.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So my main focus, that was my intention getter, but I think I made it so long, I skipped it wasn't supposed to, it wasn't my intention to make it my purpose. You know what I'm saying?
Okay, got it.
The story of
Yeah.
my grandfather coming over the boat as an intention getter and changing his name.
Got it. Okay. Well, let me hold on 1 second. I'm gonna,
Okay.
Sydney, do you have a question? Sydney, do you have a question? Huh?
No.
Okay, you're free to go.
Okay, thank you.
So hold on 1 second, Connie. I'm gonna pull it up.
Okay. Yeah, maybe it can help me figure it out. So I know what not to do.
Because I may have just read it or heard it wrong. You guys need me?
Yeah, really quick.
Yeah.
Our speech critique that's due this Sunday.
Yep.
Did you want those in like the APA formatting?
It doesn't matter what format you use. Yeah, no,
So is
because you're not
MLA?
citing, MLA is fine.
Okay,
Yep.
perfect.
Yep.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. My artifact speech is my Portuguese culture.
Oh, Lord, showing everybody.
Okay, no, everybody's gone.
Okay.
Okay, now I want you to listen to what you say in the very beginning, okay?
Okay. Mhm.
So listen to it real quick with me. I'm gonna play it.
Okay.
Good morning, everyone. My artifact speech is my Portuguese culture.
Okay, you see that?
Mm-hmm.
So you said, good morning, everyone. My purpose of my speech today is to talk about my
Oh.
Portuguese culture. So
I
you
get
could have
it.
just started with the
With it.
story.
Yeah,
Okay,
okay.
okay, that's the
Yeah, I
only
got
thing. And it didn't kill you at all. I mean, I only took off, I think, 2 points for that.
Oh, 6 of them.
You know, well, but there was other things.
Oh,
So
okay,
just
yeah.
make sure you look through those things. And
Yeah.
so
The conclusion.
and what happens is you just get to start it like you're talking naturally,
Mhm,
and that's totally fine because you can have a very conversational delivery, which is perfect,
mhm.
but don't get so relaxed that you're not formal with that start of an attention getter.
Okay,
Okay.
I get it now.
Yeah,
Yeah, my
yeah.
first thing out of my mouth should have been the story.
Exactly. That's it.
Okay.
Yeah.
My next one I'm excited about. I got some stuff. I know I got an attention getter there. So
Awesome.
let's
That's good.
see.
Good. Okay.
yeah. All right. Thanks for
Okay.
clarifying.
You're welcome. Have a good day.
You too. Bye.
Bye.